When I saw 3 tiny bundles on the cold ground, my breath caught, because I knew it wasn't an accident. I froze with one boot still in the brush. The wind died, like it was listening with me. For a heartbeat, I thought they were pups, or maybe fawns curled tight against the chill. I took one step closer, and the world tilted. They were human. 3 babies, wrapped in thin cloth that looked damp and wrong against the dirt. Their faces were red from crying, but no sound came out. I went to my knees without thinking. The earth felt colder than it had any right to be. I scanned the trail. No broken twigs where a grown person would have passed. No wheel marks, no boot prints besides my own. Only the faint scuff of leaves, the kind wind makes when it fidgets. One baby stirred, and a small hand opened like a pale leaf. Another hiccuped, that tiny jerk that tells you hunger is close. The third lay still, eyes half closed, the way sleep looks when it is too thin to hold. I put my glove near his mouth to feel the air. It was there, but weak, like a match about to give up. My mind grabbed the easy story. Some cruel person left them and ran. That was all. Pick them up, carry them out, call for help. I told myself it was simple, and for a breath I believed it. But the hair on my neck rose before I heard a thing. A weight pressed on the silence behind me. I turned, slow as if the air had thickened. Between 2 pines, the shadow of a large body did not move. Amber caught in the dim light, then 2 eyes opened the distance like a blade. A wolf, bigger than any I had seen this season. She did not snarl. She did not lower her head to charge. She stood, tall and still, the way sentries stand when they do not plan to lose. I tasted metal in my mouth. My hands remembered the rifle at my shoulder, but my fingers would not lift. She glanced at the babies and then back at me. That look was not wild hunger. That look was a question. Cold crept through my jacket and into my bones. I shifted my knee, and leaf litter crackled too loud. Her ears flicked. Her ribs rose and fell, slow and level. She did not come closer. I whispered without meaning to. Easy. My voice sounded like it belonged to someone else. The smallest bundle let out a thin mew. Her head turned to that sound, as if a string pulled it. I searched for proof of a trap, of other feet, of anything that made sense. There was nothing but pine, earth, and breath. The ground around the bundles was smooth, like it had been swept by something softer than a boot. Her paws were clean of mud, yet the needles near the babies were pressed flat. I told myself a person must have done it, must have set them down and run. I reached for the nearest bundle, and the wolf stepped forward 1 pace. I stopped dead. She didn't lift her lips. She just held my eyes and waited. Her chest rose again, steady as a bellows. I spoke to the air. I'm not here to hurt them. She blinked once, a slow, heavy blink that made no sense at all. My throat burned. The truth pressed against my ribs from the inside. She turned her head, and I saw the line of her flank. Scarred, lean, winter hard. This was not a pet. This was the forest wearing skin and judgment. I swallowed and tried again. My glove brushed the edge of a cloth, and the second baby startled, a tiny gasp. The wolf's ears tipped toward the sound. Still no growl, still no charge. She only watched me, then the babies, then me again. I thought, stupidly, that she was waiting for her pack, that in another breath the brush would fill with bodies and teeth. I pictured how quick it could be. I pictured how slow. My heart pounded so hard it shook the thought loose. The silence between us stretched tight and thin. I could hear my own blood. I could hear the faintest rustle as a small foot pushed against the cloth. I could hear the wolf breathing, even and sure, as if she had all the time in the world. I did not. I edged my body between her and the babies, more instinct than plan. She didn't flinch. Her gaze climbed up to my face and stayed. There was no hate there. There was something I do not have a word for. I have stared into many animal eyes, hunger, Fear, pain, I know those lights. This was different. This was weight without threat. This was a measure. My mouth went dry and my hands began to shake. I could not tell if I was more afraid of her teeth or of what I was starting to understand. I have been wrong before in the woods, but not like this. Not this far. The smallest bundle gave a thin cry like a bird that fell from its nest. The wolf's head dipped a fraction. Her body stayed where it was, holding ground not as a thief, but as a guard. She looked at me as if she were guarding not wolf pups, but her own children. I did not know what to do with that. I thought that was the end of it, that I would scoop them up and run, and the wild would snap shut behind me. But the forest held its breath with mine. The path out felt longer than any mile I had ever walked, and the shadow between the pines did not vanish. It only watched, as if waiting to see whether I was worth trusting. I braced for the lunge. Every lesson I ever learned in the woods stacked itself in my spine. Do not turn, do not run, make yourself broad. I told my hands to rise for the rifle, and they would not. I could already feel teeth that had not yet touched me. She didn't spring. She stepped past me and sat down beside the babies, folding her legs under as neatly as a dog at a hearth. Her tail swept once and settled. Her chest lifted and fell, slow, as if she were counting her own breath for them. The wind moved and she turned her body to take it, putting her ribs between the cold and those small faces. I edged closer, and a growl rumbled out of her like a stone sliding in a riverbed. It was not loud. It was not the kind of sound that means blood next. It was a line drawn on the ground, nothing more. I stepped back the space of a boot. The growl stopped. I stepped forward the same small space. The sound returned, steady, warning, not rage. I could feel the border she had set as clearly as if she had painted it. Her eyes kept flicking from me to the bundles and back. It wasn't the restless glance of an animal deciding how to attack. It was a check, a count, a question. She looked at me like she was waiting on my decision, and I did not know how to hold that. I grabbed the easy story again. I told myself she hadn't finished dragging away what she wanted. She would wait me out and then snatch them one by one when I left. I decided she simply hadn't had time to take her prey. Then the smallest bundle let out a thin cry, and the wolf leaned in, not with teeth but with her nose, and pushed the edge of the cloth up over the tiny bare cheek. She tucked it. Just a nudge, just enough to cover skin from the air. My throat closed so hard I could not swallow. I slid one hand out, palm empty. She watched it as if my fingers were words. I could see every scar on her muzzle, the winter in her fur, the old healed nick along one ear. She did not bristle. She only angled her shoulder more into the wind so it hit her before it reached them. When the second baby hiccuped, she lowered her head and sniffed, then touched her tongue once to the wrinkled brow. The crying cut off like a string had been saved from snapping. If your heart is tight in your chest right now, you know what I felt. Subscribe if you believe nature still keeps its miracles. I tell the truth about what the wild really does. I crouched again. Easy, I said, and my voice shook. She stared straight into me. I cannot explain what it is like to be measured by a creature that owes you nothing. I tried to count the risks, my distance, the angle, the ground, the chance her pack was already in the brush behind me. My skin prickled as if 100 eyes had opened at once. I inched one knee closer. The growl returned, soft, even. I stopped. The growl faded. A boundary held. She glanced at the babies again, then back at me, and went still. It was the stillness of someone at a door, listening for footsteps, deciding whether to open or bar it. "I'm going to help," I whispered. "I will not hurt them." I don't know why I believe she understood, but I did. The second bundle wriggled, and a foot pushed free of the cloth. The wolf noticed before I did. She slid her nose under the loosened fold and lifted it with care, tucking the foot back as if she had done that same motion 100 times for her own. I felt something in me give way. I understood then. The animal was caring for them like a mother would. Nothing in my training covered this. Nothing in any story I had heard fit the sight of a wild throat lying unguarded near human skin. My eyes kept searching for proof of a trick, a rope, a collar, a person behind a tree, a camera lens. There was only forest and breath and the slow rise and fall of a ribcage shared with the cold, so the children did not have to. I thought that was the shape of it, that I would hold my distance, wait for a chance, gather the babies and leave, and the wolf would fade like mist, and I would take my shaking home as a lesson. I thought that was all, but her ears tipped to a sound I could not hear, and her head lifted, and the woods changed color, and I knew this was only the beginning. I slid my hands toward the nearest bundle. The wolf did not leap. She watched my fingers like they were small animals I might hurt. I touched the cloth, felt the heat of a tiny body through the damp, and eased the weight up from the ground. My arms shook. The baby's breath fluttered against my wrist like a moth. The wolf's pupils widened, then narrowed. Still no snarl, still that steady breath. A long, low note drifted through the trees. It started as a thread and pulled taut until the whole ridge seemed to hum with it. Another answered from farther off, then a third, higher, impatient and young. The pack. My heart went hard and hollow. I pictured gray backs sliding out of the brush. I pictured the flash of teeth. I pictured how fast a circle can close when it is made of hunger. I planted one knee on the ground and put my body between the sound and the baby's, knowing it would not matter. She moved before I did. She stood and stepped in front of me, putting her chest to the line of trees and her shoulder near my shoulder. Her weight was calm, like a door being set in its frame. She was not facing me now. She was facing them. The howl came again, closer, my mouth filled with the sour taste of panic. I forced air in. I felt the tiny breath against my wrist again and counted it. 1, 2, 3, as if my counting could hold the world together. The wolf flicked one ear toward me, as if checking I was still there, then fixed back on the dark. A shape detached itself from the pines, gray on gray. Another slid left, careful, silent. A third came straight down the slope and stopped where the ground dipped. I could see ribs under winter coats, legs like springs, faces trying to read a page they had not seen before. The she-wolf's head rose a fraction. No sound left her. She did not bare her teeth. She just stood, a piece of earth with a heartbeat. I told myself this was a momentary delay, a pause in the inevitable, a heartbeat's courtesy before the rush. The rush did not come. They fanned out, but the line they drew bent itself around us. One passed so close I could smell the dark, clean scent of wet fur, and he did not look at me. He looked at the bundles. He looked and then looked away, as if looking too long would be rude. Another circled behind, nose to ground, tail level, ears forward but soft. A young one stepped out of turn, and the big gray at his side nudged his shoulder with a closed mouth, pushing him back into place. I lifted the second bundle from the dirt, slow, the way you lift a sleeping bird. The wolf eased a half step with me, keeping her body between the ring and the small faces. When the baby whimpered, one of the circling wolves paused, head tilted, listening with a stillness I had only ever seen when they stare at the horizon. Then he moved on, not toward us, but around us, as if we were a fire they meant to guard against the wind. The third bundle was the lightest and the coldest. I tucked the frayed cloth under his chin, and the she-wolf leaned to watch my hands, not my throat. A pulse thudded in my ears so loud I could barely hear them moving, but I heard something else too, a low chuff from the old gray who had set the line. Not threat, not warning, a note I had heard mothers use when they collect their own. The hair on my arms rose. They looked at me as if they understood. These children mattered more than anything. My fear broke in a strange way. It did not leave. It changed shape. It mixed with something that made my eyes burn. I wanted to thank them and had no language for it. My body remembered danger, even while my chest recognized something that did not fit the names I had for the wild. I kept expecting the snap, the test, the price. It did not come. We stood inside that slow, moving circle for a long minute that felt like a year. The wolves' feet made almost no sound. Needles shifted, breath clouded and faded. The big gray took the highest point of the ring and watched the trees behind us, so I did not have to. The she-wolf lowered her head and listened to the smallest baby's breath with me, like we were two people at the same cradle. I thought, foolishly, that their patience meant they would drift away soon and I would shoulder my strange load and leave. I thought the test was over. The wind turned colder and more shapes stepped out of the trees, not rushing, not sneaking, placing their feet as if each step mattered. The ring thickened and tightened, but not to crush, to hold, and I felt the next question rise like moonlight. How in the name of everything was I going to move these children through the forest with a pack around me and the day dying fast? The she-wolf glanced up at me then, as if she had heard that question, and took one deliberate step forward, pointing her body down the only open lane the ring had left. I decided to carry them out. The choice felt like stepping off a cliff. My arms already held two small lives, and the third lay waiting under thin cloth. Fear pressed up through my boots, steady and cold. I looked at the she-wolf and waited for the snap, the sudden no. Instead, she leaned forward and nudged my knee with her nose, a small push toward the last bundle. Then she stepped back, giving me room the size of a breath. I do not know a word for trust when it comes from a creature that should hate you. I slid the third baby into my coat against the heat of my body. The she-wolf turned with me, shoulder to my thigh, as if we were tied by a quiet rope. Her gaze swept the trees in front. Mine kept jerking to the shadows behind. The pack loosened their ring and fell away to a careful distance, not leaving, not crowding. We took the first steps together. Needles shifted. The babies breathed, fragile and brave. The she-wolf matched my pace, not too far, not too near, a walking wall between us and the dark. I thought they were only watching their prize, waiting for a slip, a stumble, some human mistake they could claim. But when the wind turned and stung, she moved to the side that took the hardest bite of it and walked there, ribs taking the cold so the little faces would not. A young gray loped ahead and stopped, listening, then looked back at us and veered left to open a path where the brush was thin. Another hung back, eyes on the rear, ears like small flags catching every sound. I had seen escorts before, but never like this. The ground rose and my breath turned ragged. One of the babies fussed, a thin, quivering cry, the kind that makes every part of you want to fix the world. I stopped and shifted my grip, clumsy with gloves and fear. The she-wolf stepped in front of me and lifted her head, blocking the view of my hands from the rest of the pack, like privacy was something she could grant. The cry sharpened and cut me. I lowered my face to the tiny one and whispered nothing words. The she-wolf leaned in and touched her tongue once to the wet cheek, a quick, careful wash the way mothers do when they cannot reach with hands. The crying stopped mid-sound, broke off clean as a twig. My eyes filled and overflowed before I knew it was happening. I cried because I realized the animal was kinder than many people. Tears ran hot and foolish down a cold face. I did not hide them. The babies slept and woke in quick tides. Each time they stirred, the pack paused, listening, not with hunger but with attention, like the forest itself had taken on a duty. We crossed a deadfall, slick with frost. I balanced, heart in my mouth. The she-wolf went first, turned, and waited at the far edge until my boots reached safe ground, then touched the log with her paw as if to say, "Here, here, This is how. The young gray who had scouted ahead lifted his nose and gave a soft chuff I felt more than heard. The line behind us shifted to match. I kept expecting the old story to return, the one where the wild remembers what it is and tears apart what it cannot understand. It did not. When my foot slid and I clutched the bundles too tight, the she-wolf pressed her shoulder into my thigh to steady me. When my breath hitched, she slowed. When the smallest one gave a weak cough, she looked back at me, then laid her head level with the baby, listening, waiting until the air smoothed out again. Needles glittered with cold light. The day thinned. I started counting breaths because numbers were the only thing that seemed to hold. In, outside, in, outside. The pack moved like a thought kept simple on purpose. I told myself it would end at the edge of the trees, that they would stop where the field began and I would walk the last stretch alone, that they were only here to make sure I left their ground. That sounded neat enough to believe. Then a raven screamed from the ridge and the whole line paused without a word. The big gray took the high spot, nose cutting the air. The she-wolf eased half a step closer to my knee and clicked her teeth once at a youngster that crept too near the babies. He veered off at once, chastened, tail low but steady. No one asked her why, no one needed to. We moved again, and with every yard, the world I thought I knew cracked another hairline down the middle. I kept walking because the only way out was forward. The she-wolf kept with me because she had made a choice I still do not understand. The pack kept their watch because something bigger than fear was moving them. I thought the worst was behind us, that the last hard part was only the weight in my arms and the ache in my legs. If I had known what waited at the creek, how cold, how swift, how impossible, I might have turned back and begged the forest for another answer. But the water was ahead and unseen, and the day kept slipping, and we walked toward the sound that would test every fragile thing we had just begun to trust. We broke out of the trees into a narrow clearing, and for a breath, I believed we were safe. The sky opened a little. The wind thinned. My knees went weak with borrowed relief. Grass showed through frost like dull thread through cloth. I told myself the worst had ended at the tree line, and the rest was only walking. Then the babies began to cry. At first it was a thin whimper, then a sharper saw edge that cut through the clearing. One voice set off the others until all three were crying in turns, small bodies writhing against my chest and arms. The sound carried farther in the open. Every muscle in me went hard. I could see the whole pack in my head wheeling back at that noise. I turned, ready for gray bodies to pour from the brush. The she-wolf stood beside me, ears up, head tilted. She watched my face, then the bundles, trying to read a language with no words. I rocked the smallest one, useless motion against hunger and cold. The crying did not stop. I took 2 steps toward the far edge of the clearing. The she-wolf moved ahead of me, paused, checked the wind, and then, without a sound, slipped into the trees and disappeared. My gut dropped. The clearing felt suddenly wide and empty. I stared at the place where she had been and saw only branches knitting themselves back together. The babies cried harder. I felt the first lick of panic turn to flame. I decided the animal had left us. I told myself she had done what she came to do, steer us out, keep her kind in check, and then melt back into the life that made sense. I stood there with 3 small lives, and the sound of them drilling through the cold, and thought, this is where the story ends. Alone on the edge of the wild. Minutes stretched. Twigs ticked. A raven's croak fell and faded. I shifted my hold and whispered the same small comforts that never helped, hoping the shape of my voice would count for food. It didn't. Then the brush parted. She stepped out of the trees with something dark and heavy hanging from her mouth. Wings dragged, limp, It was a bird, big as my forearm, fresh and still. She walked straight to us, placed it on the ground by my boot, and looked up at me. I could not breathe. She was bringing them food like they were her own pups. I stared at the bird, at her, at the bird again. Her chest lifted, fell, steady. She nosed the body closer to my toe and then flicked her eyes to the smallest bundle. There was no mistaking it. An offering, not to me, but to the crying that would not stop. I don't know what my face did then, but I felt something break open behind my ribs. My throat burned. I had to blink hard to see. The baby's cries hitched and wavered at the sudden quiet purpose that settled over us all. I crouched and turned the littlest one so he could feel the warmth of my body more. The she-wolf watched, head low, tail still, a mother holding herself back at the door. The pack, which I had braced to see charging, appeared at the far edge of the clearing one by one and stopped, forming a loose, respectful line. No one crossed closer than a few careful yards. They stood like sentries, looking outward. A young gray shifted his weight, impatient. The big old male brushed him with a closed mouth, and the youngster settled, eyes fixed on the trees, not on the meat, not on the babies, not on me. The rules were different here. I could feel them even if I didn't know the words. The she-wolf bent and tore a strip from the bird's breast with delicate teeth, then paused, glancing at me, at the tiny faces, as if waiting for my permission to do what instinct told her to do. I shook my head, helpless human, useless and grateful, and fumbled in my pack for anything that could stand in for milk. Cloth. Water warmed against my skin. I dampened a corner and touched it to the smallest mouth. He latched to wetness, not food, but it calmed him, just enough. The other two followed like they had practiced this before they were born. The she-wolf watched each little change in their breathing and eased onto her belly beside us, planting her body between the wind and the small faces. When one baby sobbed again, sharp and sudden, she leaned in and licked his cheek, quick as a heartbeat. The sob broke to a sigh. My eyes filled. I let them. I cried because the animal was kinder than many people I have known. For a few minutes, the clearing became a room with walls made of fur and breath. The pack held the horizon. The wind softened. The baby's cries thinned to small hiccups, and then to sleep. I stroked the edge of a cloth with a clumsy glove and tried not to shake. I thought that would be the end of the nightmare, that the worst work of the day had turned into a strange sort of peace and would stay that way until we reached the road. I thought we had found our footing again, strange as it was, and that nothing else would rise up out of the trees to test it. Then the first cold hiss reached us from beyond the birches, a sound like teeth chattering under the earth. Water, fast and hard, not far ahead. The creek I had hoped to circle was swelling with melt and moonrun, and I knew the path the wolves had chosen would take us straight to it. I built a small fire with shaking hands, dry bark, thin sticks, breath held like it would help the spark take. The first flame licked up and I fed it careful, scared to smother it with my hope. Heat found my fingers and ran up my arms. I held the babies close to the smoke's edge, the way you hold cold stones to the sun. They stopped crying one by one. The smallest blinked slow and let his mouth fall open in sleep. The others sighed like tiny bellows easing. I felt the ground soften under my knees as if the forest itself had let out a breath. The she-wolf lay down on the other side of them without being told. She folded her legs and pressed her flank along the cloth piles, not too hard, just enough to share warmth. Steam rose faint from her coat as the fire found the frost on her. She kept her head up, ears moving, eyes on the trees. I watched the rise and fall of her ribs and timed my own breath to it until my chest remembered how. The pack drifted to the edges of the clearing and then farther, like a tide going out. One stood a while on the ridge and then slipped away. Another paused at the birches, nose high, and vanished. The big gray gave us a last look that felt like a handoff and turned into the pines. In a few minutes, it was just me, 3 sleeping lives, the fire, and her. I thought that now she would simply stand guard. I thought the day would fade gentle and she would keep her distance until I walked them out at first light. She did not keep her distance. She rose, stretched once, slow and long, and padded over to me. I stayed still because anything else felt like a mistake. She closed the space between us until I could see the small flecks of winter in her eyes. Then she leaned in and pressed her shoulder to my thigh, all that living weight set against me like a promise. I did not breathe for a count of 10. I did not turn my head. I let the moment tell me what it was. Her fur was coarse where wind and brush had combed it, and warm where the fire had reached. Her heart beat steady through muscle and bone. She lifted her face and met my eyes. There was a plea in her eyes, as if she trusted me with her family. My throat tightened. The fire snapped. The babies slept deeper. She held my gaze without a flicker, and in that long look, I understood a new fear, the fear of failing what had just been handed to me. I had carried many things out of these woods. None of them had ever looked back at me like this. She shifted and made a small sound in her chest, not a growl, not a whine. A note you hear when a mother speaks to a creature that cannot answer yet. Then she stepped away and tucked herself along the babies again, belly to their blankets, tail curled to catch any stray cold. When one tossed and made a soft, lost noise, she lowered her head and breathed warm air over his face until he stilled. I fed the fire a few more sticks and watched the smoke climb. My hands steadied. The woods settled into night sounds, far wings, a branch easing, the creek's cold hiss just beyond the dark. I could feel the water like a new question rising out of the ground. She looked at the flames, then at me, then at the trees where the pack had gone. The quiet around us was not empty. It held shape. It held the edges of a choice. I wanted to ask her what she needed from me and had no words that would not break it. I thought again she would keep to her post till dawn, and that would be the end of this strange truce. I thought that all she wanted was to make sure I did not fail in the simple work of keeping them warm. Then she stood, crossed to me once more, and pressed her head lightly against my chest like she was setting a mark. She looked up into me with that same impossible trust and then flicked her eyes to the dark line of the creek. I followed her glance and listened to the water grind the stones. I understood that warmth was only the first debt. The next thing would be harder. The next thing would ask for more than fire and hands. If I had known what that water would take from us and give back, I might have begged the night to last forever. But she had already turned toward the sound, and I knew that when she moved, I would have to rise and follow. I made the choice to carry them to the village. The creek hissed in the dark like a warning. The fire burned low behind us. I lifted the first bundle, then the second, then set the third against my chest under my coat. She rose with me. She took the lead without being asked. Her ears cut the wind. Her body found the shallow places before my boots did. We moved toward the water because there was no other way that did not cost more time than the babies had. The bank crumbled under frost. Stones shifted. I tested one with my heel, and it rolled like a bad tooth. The she-wolf stepped in, one paw, then another, slow, deliberate, feeling the current like a hand. She turned her head back to me and waited. I followed where she set her feet. Cold climbed my legs like iron. The bundles were warm and terrified and very quiet. I kept my arms high and my breath higher. Midstream, the smallest stiffened. He made a thin, trapped sound that was not a cry. His mouth opened, but no air came. His face went the wrong color fast. Panic shattered my thinking. The water grabbed at my knees. I could not kneel. I could not stop. I could not fix what was happening in my hands. I reached shore and dropped to the moss. I tore open my coat with clumsy fingers. The tiny chest barely moved. The small mouth pinched and the eyes rolled, and the quiet felt like a scream. I don't know what to do, I said to no one and to everything. My hands forgot every simple thing. My head emptied out. I looked at the she-wolf because I had nothing left. She slid close on her belly, careful as breath. She placed herself beside the smallest one and lowered her head. Her tongue touched the tiny sternum in small, quick strokes, then the throat, then back to the chest, rhythmic, firm, like a heart outside the body, calling the one inside to wake. She breathed warm over his face between licks, a soft push of air that smelled like pine and winter. I held my own breath so I could hear his. Nothing. The world narrowed to her steady work. My fear and my faith wrestled in the same inch of space. Then a cough, thin as thread. Another, stronger. The chest hitched. Air rushed in with a small, desperate sound that made my vision swim. The baby cried, weak, wet, angry at the world. I have never heard anything as beautiful. The she-wolf stopped and looked at me once, just once, to be sure I had seen what she had done. I nodded because my mouth would not work. She had saved a human life. My fear collapsed into something heavier and kinder. I wanted to thank her with words she could not know. I wanted to wrap the whole forest in my arms. I wanted to weep, and I did. I thought that was the last miracle, that nothing else could climb higher than this. I thought the story had spent itself. She proved me wrong by doing nothing at all. She took one step back, then another. She stood where the trees began and watched me gather the bundles again. Her chest rose and fell, steady. Her eyes held me in place. She looked at me like a mother looks at a nanny she trusts with what is most precious. The meaning landed so hard I swayed. This was not surrender. This was not defeat. It was a giving over and a reckoning at the same time. I lifted the smallest closer to my heat. I checked each breath, counting without numbers. The she-wolf remained at the edge between us and the dark, neither leaving nor coming closer. She had done what only she could do, and now she was asking me to do the rest. The creek gnashed behind us like bad memory. The wind shifted and carried a hint of smoke from far fields. I could almost see the road that would lead me home if I believed it existed. The babies sighed and settled, worn out from crying and from being saved. I stood, and the world tilted and then steadied. She held my eyes one last time. No growl, no order, only that strange, deep permission. I turned toward the dim smear of open land. I walked because the choice had been made for me by something better than logic. Behind me, I felt her watching, not as a hunter, not as a judge, but as the keeper of a promise that now lived in my arms. If I had known how the night would end at the field's edge, what sound would rise and what silence would answer, I might have begged for one more mile of trees. But the ground opened, and the cold pulled at my sleeves, and I carried the children into the dark that leads to light, while the wild stood and let me go. We came out of the last trees, and the field lights from the far houses looked like small moons set in the grass. My legs shook from the stop more than from the walking. A dog barked, another answered, and then a door slammed somewhere ahead. I held the babies higher against my chest, as if the sight of people might chill them. For a breath I told myself it was finished, that I had crossed the line where the wild gives you back to your own, and nothing more is asked. Then the sound rolled over the field. It wasn't close. It wasn't a threat. It was one long note lifting and falling, clear as a bell struck under snow. The she-wolf's voice. It carried like water carries light, and I felt every hair on my arms rise. I turned toward the dark edge of the woods and saw nothing. But I knew she was there, not to claim, not to call me back, only to say goodbye. People were running now. A woman with a shawl took the first bundle from me like it was her own heartbeat. A man I knew by his hat, but not his name, grabbed the second, eyes wide, mouth working. "Where?" he asked. "Who?" I tried to answer, and the words came out in the wrong order. I pointed to the trees. "Found them there," I said. "Not alone." They packed around me with questions. I told the truth and watched it bounce off their faces. A wolf? Guarding? Helping? They shook their heads like I had frost in my brain. One laughed without meaning to and clapped my shoulder like he was waking me. Another's mouth went hard, like he was deciding if I'd made it all up. The midwife didn't look at me at all. She looked only at the babies, counting breaths with her ear, her hands moving quick and sure. I could hear the howl again, farther now, softer. I lifted my head, and no one else did. They were busy with blankets and hot water and words that made sense indoors. I stood there with empty arms and a ringing in my chest. I wanted to forget it, to chalk it up to exhaustion, to call it a trick of fear and cold and the way the mind stitches sense into what it cannot hold. I went home and tried to sleep sitting up in a chair because lying down made the night tilt. My boots still on, my coat half off, my hands remembering small weight. The room felt wrong without the sound of her breath against the edge of my world. Sometime after midnight, a thin wind ran its fingers along the eaves. Then, from far off, the note came again, low even, not asking for anything. I stood before I knew I had stood. I opened the door and stepped into the kind of cold that makes you careful with your lungs. The village lay quiet. A light turned once in a window, then went out. The fields were a dark sheet. The howl rose and fell one more time. Not a hunt, not a claim, a check. It slid across the roofs and down the road and laid itself at my feet like a question that did not need an answer. The skin between my shoulder blades crawled, not with fear, but with the same stunned gratitude that had held me by the creek. I whispered, "They're safe," to the night, and the night took it. On the second night, the same. On the third, only silence, and I found I missed the sound, like a name I had not heard in years. The babies were with people who knew how to feed and warm and count. I visited once and kept my mouth shut when they told me how they'd been found by a stroke of luck. I was not there to win the story. I was there to see 3 tiny chests rise and fall like promises kept. I tried to work. I tried to move through the day the way you move when nothing strange has happened. The world looked the same and did not feel it. Every trail had a second path laid over it now, one only I could see. I understood. Animals remember kindness. It landed in me like a stone dropped into a deep well, not a lesson I had earned, a debt I had been given. The next morning I packed a small bundle and walked back to the tree line. I did not call. I did not whistle. I stood and waited with my hat in my hands and the breath burning white, wanting only to say thank you to the dark that had eyes in it. I did not know if she would answer. I did not know if she needed to, but I knew I was not done. The story had not finished at the road. It had only turned, the way a river turns just before it widens, and I found myself listening for the sound that would tell me where to go next. Weeks later, I went back to the forest. I told no one. I left before dawn with a small bundle and the quiet you carry when you're going to speak to something older than you. The fields were rutted with thaw and frost, the sky a thin gray lid. I walked the same path because my feet remembered even if my head wanted to forget. The trees took me in without comment. A woodpecker worked somewhere high, steady as a clock. I kept my eyes low, looking for what the world leaves when it passes. A bend in grass, a smear in mud, the kind of truth that does not explain itself. My breath fogged and faded. I listened for her and heard only distance. I reached the place. The ground knew me, Needles lay in the same strange circle, pressed where small weight had slept. The fire scar had healed to a dark coin. For a long minute there was nothing except the sound of my own sleeve as I moved. Then I saw them, fresh tracks at the edge of the clearing, not old, not soft, edges clean, pads plain, claws a neat signature at the tips, prints from a wolf heavy with winter, and smaller ones beside, light as thumbprints. They wound to the spot where the babies had lain, then away, then back again, like someone coming to a door and not yet knocking. The clearing was empty, no breath in the brush, no flash of gray through the pines, only the marks of a visit and the feeling that I had missed someone by a handful of heartbeats. Silence held the place the way a palm holds a small stone. I set my bundle down, a thick blanket, a strip of smoked meat I knew she did not need, what passed for an offering from foolish hands. I stood with my hat in my fingers because standing bare is the only honest way I know to say a thing like this. "Thank you," I whispered, and the word left me like warmth leaving a cup. I thought that was all. I thought the forest would take the thanks and keep its own counsel, and that nothing more would come of it. I almost turned to go. Then the sound rose, one voice, not near, not far. It lifted out of the trees and poured into the cold until even the bark seemed to listen, not the hunt call, not the high talk of yearlings. A lone note that spread wide and then narrowed to a point that found the center of me. My heart stopped for one beat and then came back different. I did not answer. I could not. I only stood there while the last of it faded like breath on glass. I have heard wolves all my life. This was not for the pack. This was for me. I saw the tracks again in my mind, the small ones and the large, the way they circled the place where the babies had been. I saw her body between me and the others, her shoulder at my thigh, her tongue on a human child's skin. I saw the way she had stepped back at the creek and handed me a task with nothing but her eyes. The thought that had been walking behind me for weeks finally came and stood where I could see it. She had trusted me with what was most precious to her. It was not meat or territory or pride. It was not even her own safety. It was the promise she had taken up when she found 3 small lives where they did not belong. She guarded that promise and then gave it to me because I could carry it farther than she could. She weighed me and my kind and decided that the smallest chance was worth more than the surest habit. I felt the ground tilt and the air thin. I felt the old stories I carried in my bones loosen and fall. I had been so certain of what the wild is, of what it wants, of what it takes. Standing in that quiet, with the tracks drying at my feet and her voice still ringing the edge of the world, I knew I had been wrong in a way that makes you want to kneel. I knelt. I do not remember deciding to. I pressed my hand to the earth where the babies had slept, and the heat of my palm did not seem enough. Tears came before I knew they were coming. They were hot and foolish and right. I cried because this cannot be, and yet I saw it. I cried because a wolf measured a man and found him fit to borrow her faith. I cried because something so old and simple had reached across the line I thought could not be crossed and placed its weight in my hands. There is no prayer for that. There is only the life you try to live after. The wind shifted. A raven cut the clearing and was gone. The lone howl did not come again. It did not need to. The silence that followed said more than any words I could have found. I stood and wiped my face and felt foolish and clean. I picked up my bundle and left it anyway. A poor human thank you laid at the door of a house I will never own. On the way out, I found my own tracks from weeks before, half erased by weather and time. They threaded beside the wolves as if the 2 paths had always meant to braid for a few yards and then part. On the ridge, I turned once and looked back, and the clearing looked like any other patch of trees to anyone else. That is how the world keeps its secrets. It makes them look ordinary once they have done their work. I walked toward the fields and the roofs and the noise, and every sound of the village felt new. A child laughed somewhere past the road. A door shut. A kettle lid rattled and stilled. Life going on, unaware that the forest had leaned close and taught one stubborn man a different language. I still wake some nights when the wind comes right. I still listen. Sometimes I hear her, and sometimes I don't. Either way, I answer the same way, with the same few words given to the dark with a foolish man's hope. They are safe. If you believe nature is wiser than us, right, we are not alone in this world.